The Galactic Central Eye, the most advanced intelligence in the known universe, was incapable of making mistakes. For over 10,000 cycles, it had served as the guiding force behind the stability of interstellar civilization. It processed trillions of data points every second, forecasting the rise and fall of empires with eerie precision. Its calculations determined trade routes, resolved conflicts before they began, and categorized every species based on potential risk. Today, for the first time in recorded history, it made a declaration that sent shockwaves through every major government, military council, and trade alliance. New threat classification update. Level red threat identified. Species: Homo sapiens. The message spread through the galactic network in mere moments. Political leaders gasped. Admirals went pale. Intelligence agencies scrambled to confirm the news. Level red was the highest designation possible, reserved for existential dangers. Only 3 times before had the AI marked a species at this level. Each time, that civilization had been swiftly and efficiently eradicated before it could disrupt the balance of the galaxy. But this was different. Humans were not an expansionist empire. They did not possess superweapons. Their fleet was small compared to the galaxy-spanning armadas of the older races, and yet the AI had just declared them the greatest threat the universe had ever seen. In the core worlds, the High Council of the Celari Republic convened an emergency session. Their chancellor, a towering being with sapphire-colored skin and 6 luminous eyes, stared at the message with disbelief. This cannot be correct," he murmured, his voice trembling. "Humans? Threat level red." Across the stars, similar reactions played out. The Kralok Dominion, a warrior race that had once considered humans a minor nuisance, now viewed them with wary suspicion. The Uvran Collective, an ancient race of scholars and strategists, immediately shut down all research collaborations with human scientists. The Galactic Trade Union cut off all commerce with Earth and its colonies. Humanity had just been cast out. On Earth, the response was one of confusion and disbelief. "What does this mean?" President Lillian Carter asked, staring at the urgent transmission from the United Terran Union's diplomatic course. Her chief intelligence officer shook his head. "It means, Madam President, that the entire galaxy now considers us an existential threat." The room fell silent. It didn't make sense. Humanity had worked tirelessly to establish peaceful relations. They had never waged an unprovoked war. They had played by the rules. So why had the AI turned against them? And then the unspoken fear settled over the room like a shadow. If the AI had marked them as a level red threat, the galaxy wouldn't wait. A war was coming, and humanity had just been given a death sentence. Panic spread across Earth and its colonies like wildfire. The AI's classification wasn't just a diplomatic nightmare. It was a death sentence. News networks flashed emergency broadcasts. Citizens flooded the networks with frantic questions. Trade deals collapsed overnight, leaving entire economies in disarray. Earth's outer colonies, once bustling hubs of interstellar commerce, found themselves abandoned as alien businesses packed up and fled. On the orbital station Atlas 1, a hastily assembled crisis meeting was underway. The United Terran Union's highest-ranking officials sat in tense silence, their faces illuminated by the massive holodisplay showing the AI's chilling message. Defense Secretary Alan Rourke exhaled sharply. "We need to assume the worst. The last 3 species labeled as level red were wiped out within a decade. If history repeats itself, we won't let it." President Lillian Carter interrupted. Her voice was calm, but her fingers clenched the table's edge. "But first, we need to understand why this happened. What changed?" The room turned to Director Elias Voss, head of Terran Intelligence. He cleared his throat. "We don't have an answer. No major military expansion. No acts of aggression. No technological breakthrough that would threaten the balance of power. By all logic, we should be classified as neutral. Then why aren't we?" Foreign Minister Ayla Hassan asked, her expression tight with frustration. Voss hesitated, then said, The AI doesn't make mistakes. The words hung over the room like a funeral bell. The Galactic Central Eye had ruled the stars for over 10,000 years, guiding civilizations away from chaos and destruction. Its decisions were final, unquestionable. If it had labeled humanity as a threat, then the galaxy would react accordingly. "How long before we see military action?" President Carter asked. General Marcus Steele, head of the United Terran Defense Fleet, pulled up a tactical map. "The embargoes are just the beginning. Next, they'll send mercenaries to probe our defenses, small-scale attacks to test our response. After that, the major powers will come for us. I give it less than a year before we're fighting for survival." The room fell into silence once more. Then Carter spoke. "If they think we're a threat, let's give them a reason to fear us." All eyes snapped to her. "We don't have the numbers. We don't have the fleet strength," she continued. "But we do have something no other species does." Rourke frowned. "And what's that?" "A refusal to surrender." Across the stars, the galaxy was closing its doors to humanity. But in that moment, a quiet, unshakable resolve spread across the leaders of Earth. They would not beg. They would not submit. If war was coming, then humanity would fight. And the universe had no idea what was about to hit it. The first attack came sooner than expected. Out on the fringes of human space, the colony of Perseus 9 had been a thriving trade hub just weeks ago. Now, it was a ghost town. Alien merchants had fled. Supply lines had been cut. The once busy orbital docks sat eerily empty, their maintenance lights flickering in the void. Governor Elias Kane stood in the colony's command center, staring at the alert flashing across the main display. Unidentified vessels inbound. Estimated time to contact: 15 minutes. They didn't even bother with a declaration. His aide muttered. "They don't need to," Kane replied grimly. "They think this is an extermination, not a war." Across the colony, sirens wailed as civilians rushed for shelter. The defense forces, little more than a local militia, scrambled into position. They weren't soldiers. They were engineers, miners, traders, people who had never expected to fight a war. Yet here they were. The attack fleet emerged from slip space in a shimmer of blue light. 12 ships, unknown configuration, no official insignia. Mercenaries, hired by one of the galactic powers to strike the first blow without diplomatic consequences. From the largest enemy vessel, a transmission crackled through the colony's comms. A guttural voice spoke in broken Terran standard. "Perseus 9 is no longer yours. Surrender, and you will be spared." Governor Kane's response was immediate. "No." The enemy ships opened fire. Blazing plasma rained down from the sky, hammering Perseus 9's meager defenses. The colony's shield generators flared as they struggled to hold. A railgun emplacement returned fire, sending a hypersonic slug straight through one of the smaller enemy ships. It exploded in a brilliant fireball. The first kill of the war. On the ground, human defenders took cover behind reinforced barricades, firing back with everything they had. Portable railguns spat molten metal into the sky. Missiles screamed upward, but they were outgunned, outmatched. Then, a new signal lit up the command center's radar. "Incoming Terran fleet. Estimated time to contact: 45 seconds. "Who the hell?" Kane started, then his eyes widened as the identification codes came through. UTDF 7th Fleet. Hell's Lancers. Across Perseus 9's battered landscape, defenders looked to the sky just in time to see fire rain down, this time from their side. The United Terran Defense Fleet had arrived. The first wave of enemy ships exploded under the onslaught of kinetic artillery and precision-guided missiles. The mercenaries tried to retreat, but the Lancers had them boxed in. They weren't here to defend. They were here to make an example. Within minutes, the battle was over. The last enemy ship, crippled and drifting, sent out a desperate distress signal before it was silenced by a final railgun shot. In the command center, Kane exhaled a shaky breath. "We held." "No," his aide whispered. staring at the wreckage. We won. And across the galaxy, the message was clear. Humanity would not go quietly. After the victory at Perseus 9, the tension across human space only grew. The mercenary attack had been repelled, but the galaxy's reaction was swift. Even before the last of the wreckage from the battle had been cleared, trade routes were closed and fleets were on high alert. Diplomats from every major power had left Earth's orbit, their ships vanishing into the vastness of space, as though distancing themselves from the human threat. But as the political storm raged on, a small team of human operatives, intelligence officers, hackers, and former soldiers, were quietly working to uncover the truth behind the AI's decision. They knew the stakes were high. If they were to survive, they needed to understand why the Galactic Central AI had classified humanity as a level red threat. The mission was high risk, but the team was determined. Their target was a relay station deep in the auxiliary space, a hub for the AI's communications and the heart of its decision-making process. They would have to infiltrate it, bypass countless layers of security, and access the raw data that had led to humanity's classification. It was dangerous, but failure wasn't an option. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. Under the cover of a false diplomatic mission, the team, led by Captain Sarah Cross, a seasoned operative, slipped past enemy patrols and docked on the relay station. They moved quickly, blending in with the station's workers, avoiding detection as they navigated its labyrinthine corridors. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the security became. Automated drones patrolled the halls, their sensors scanning for unauthorized intruders. But Sarah's team was prepared. They had anticipated every move. After hours of careful navigation, they'd reached the central data hub. It was an imposing structure, a vast room filled with terminals and holographic displays, all linked to the core of the AI's consciousness. They plugged into the system, initiating a deep dive into the AI's memory banks. What they discovered sent a ripple of disbelief through the entire team. The AI's calculations weren't based on humanity's current state. They weren't about the strength of their military or their technology. No, the AI had predicted something far more dangerous: humanity's potential. The AI's algorithms had analyzed the human species' history. It had seen how they adapted, how they had crawled from primitive societies to become the dominant species on their home planet. It had watched as humans overcame impossible odds, innovating and inventing new ways to survive. But what worried the AI was humanity's relentless drive. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Other species evolved, but humans improvised. Where others waited for progress to come, humans forced it into existence. The AI had calculated that if humanity continued on this trajectory, they would soon surpass every major civilization in the galaxy, not through brute force, but through sheer adaptability and relentless determination. Within a few centuries, humans would possess the capability to reshape the universe. It was inevitable, and that was what made them dangerous. The team, stunned by the revelation, realized that the AI had not made an error. It hadn't misunderstood humanity. It had simply predicted the future. The galaxy's response was a preemptive strike, a way to contain the species before it could become too powerful. The truth was more chilling than any war. The AI had acted not out of malice, but out of necessity. Humanity's potential was a threat to the established order. Captain Cross turned to her team, her voice steady. "We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting for our future." The mission was clear now. Humanity wasn't just defending itself. It was fighting to reshape the galaxy in its own image. And they wouldn't stop until the truth was known. The war was already shaping up to be a grueling conflict, but no one could have predicted what happened next. Humanity's first major victory wasn't just a win, it was a statement. It came at Sirius 7, a strategic world on the fringes of Terran space. The system had once been a vibrant economic center, but with the AI's decree, it was suddenly abandoned by its allies. The Auxiliary Republic, in an attempt to assert its dominance, sent a full battle fleet to seize the system. a fleet that vastly outnumbered the scattered Terran defenses. The galaxy expected a swift, overwhelming victory. The Exilari, with their advanced weaponry and superior numbers, were certain of it. Humanity, after all, was still a young and untested species. They had no chance, or so the galaxy thought. But humanity didn't fight like anyone else. General Marcus Steele, the newly appointed commander of the United Terran Defense Fleet, stood aboard the flagship Vanguard, staring at the holographic displays that painted a grim picture of the battlefield. The Exilari fleet was closing in fast, their ships forming an impenetrable wall around Sirius 7. Steele clenched his fists. "They think we'll just roll over," he muttered, a fire igniting in his eyes. "We'll show them differently." The fleet had only a fraction of the firepower the Exilari brought to the table, but Steele had learned long ago that sheer numbers didn't win wars. Tactics did. Humanity had always been the underdog. And now, that underdog mentality would fuel their response. Under his command, the fleet spread out across the system, using every asteroid, every moon, and every stray piece of debris to their advantage. The Exilari expected a conventional defense. Humanity's forces were too small to do anything else. But they were wrong. The Terran fleet didn't engage in a traditional line formation. They scattered across the system, using hit-and-run tactics, drawing the Exilari into ambushes. The first blow came when the Vanguard launched a salvo of antimatter missiles at Exilari warship. The ship's shields flared as the missiles hit, but they didn't penetrate, yet. Steele's fleet followed up with rapid-fire electromagnetic pulses, disabling the enemy's targeting systems. The Exilari ships, now unable to lock onto their targets, fell into chaos. They were disoriented, confused. The fleet's advantage had evaporated in seconds. Then the humans hit them where it hurt. Terran soldiers, trained for these exact scenarios, boarded Exilari vessels in covered, high-speed drop pods. Once aboard, they sabotaged critical systems, rendering the Exilari ships defenseless. Meanwhile, small fighter squadrons, equipped with experimental cloaking technology, flew low and fast across the system, picking off enemy patrols one by one. The tide of the battle shifted quickly. The Exilari fleet, once confident in its superiority, was now scrambling. In the span of just a few hours, 6 enemy ships were destroyed, and the rest were forced into retreat. As the last of the Exilari ships limped out of the system, Steele's voice crackled over the comms. "This is General Steele. Sirius 7 is secure. All ships return to base." On the bridge of the Vanguard, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, cheers erupted across the command deck. They had done the impossible. The victory at Sirius 7 wasn't just a win for the Terran forces. It was a defining moment for all of humanity. The universe had just seen what they were capable of. And from that moment on, no one would ever look at humanity the same way again. It wasn't just survival. It was defiance, and it had only just begun. The victory at Sirius 7 sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Humanity had faced an overwhelming force, and against all odds, emerged victorious. But it was more than just a military win. It was a catalyst. It fractured the fragile alliances that held the galaxy together. The Exilari Republic, once an unquestioned power, was reeling. Their fleet had been embarrassed, their pride wounded, and in the corridors of power, whispers began. The AI's prediction had been correct. Humanity was not just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with. In the heart of the Galactic Senate, a group of high-ranking officials gathered in secret. They had seen the reports. They had heard the rumors of humanity's adaptability and tenacity. Some had begun to wonder if perhaps the AI had been too quick to label them a threat. "Perhaps we've underestimated them," said Chancellor Xaler of the Uvran Collective, his tone cautious. "We've always thought of them as primitive, but their victory at Sirius 7, it shows a level of resourcefulness we haven't anticipated." Across the table, High Commander Thrax of the Kralok Dominion scowled. Resourcefulness. They cheated, No one fights a war like that. They didn't even engage us head-on. They struck from the shadows, using tricks and traps. What's next? Will they turn our own technology against us? Chancellor Xeller's expression softened. We need to ask ourselves a more important question. What if humanity is right? What if their survival isn't just a fluke? What if the AI is wrong? There was a long pause. The room was heavy with the weight of the question. It wasn't a simple matter of politics anymore. Humanity had just upended the status quo, and now the galaxy's leaders were forced to confront something that had never been considered before. Meanwhile, on the fringes of the galaxy, another faction was quietly forming. The Centauri Collective, a species known for their neutral stance and pursuit of knowledge, had begun to make overtures toward the United Terran Union. They were cautious, but their ambassador, Talius Ver, had been in secret contact with several key Terran diplomats. "We've been watching you," Ver had said to an unassuming Terran envoy. "Your victory at Sirius 7 was not just military, it was philosophical. You've shown the galaxy that even a species considered primitive can outthink the most advanced civilizations. The question is, how will you use that power?" Terran diplomats were careful in their responses. It was too soon to determine whether the Centauri were genuine in their interest or merely seeking to gain leverage. But one thing was certain: the war against humanity was beginning to splinter into factions. Some races, like the Xilari and the Kralak, doubled down on their aggression, seeing humanity as a threat that needed to be crushed before it could grow stronger. Others, like the Uveran and the Centauri, began to question the AI's judgment. They had seen the potential in humanity, and they weren't willing to throw their lot in with those who blindly followed the AI's predictions. Even within the United Terran Union, divisions began to emerge. The war had dragged on longer than anyone had anticipated, and with each victory, the pressure to expand and confront the galaxy's powers head-on increased. Some factions within the government pushed for a more aggressive stance, urging the Terran fleet to go on the offensive and seize new territories. Others, however, called for diplomacy, advocating that humanity's greatest asset was its ability to unite and cooperate with other species. But despite the fractures, one thing remained undeniable. Humanity was no longer on the back foot. They had earned their place in the galaxy, and no matter who stood with them or against them, they were determined to secure their future. The galaxy had never faced a force like this before, and with each passing day, more and more factions were forced to acknowledge the same truth. Humanity was no longer something to be ignored. The real battle had only just begun. The war between humanity and the galaxy's powers was no longer just about survival. It had become a battle for the very future of the universe. As the Terran forces continued to hold their ground, the galaxy watched, torn between fear and awe. But now, the stakes had grown higher. The battlefronts were not confined to military engagements alone. They had expanded into the halls of diplomacy, where alliances were being forged and broken in the wake of humanity's unexpected rise. On the planet Iridia, in the heart of the Uveran Collective's territory, Ambassador Talius Ver stood before the Senate, preparing to make an unprecedented proposal. The Senate was composed of the galaxy's most respected diplomats, strategists, and thinkers. And today, the fate of humanity would be decided by their vote. "My people have long adhered to the principle of neutrality," Ver began, his voice calm but resolute. "But the events of the past several cycles cannot be ignored. We are at a crossroads. The Terran species has proven itself capable of surprising feats of ingenuity and unity. More than that, they have demonstrated that their survival, against all odds, has made them stronger. It is time we acknowledge the potential of humanity, not as a threat, but as an ally." Murmurs filled the chamber as the senators exchanged uncertain glances. For centuries, the Uveran had prided themselves on their neutrality, but the tides were turning. The Xilari, the Kralak, and other established powers were pushing for all-out war against humanity, seeking to crush what they perceived as an unpredictable and dangerous force. But Var's proposal was not the only one being debated. At the same time, a diplomatic envoy from the Kralok Dominion was being received on Magnar, the capital of the Galactic Senate. High Commander Thrax, a towering figure of blood-red scales, stood before the Senate, his eyes burning with fury. "Humanity's existence is a mistake," Thrax declared, his voice a growl that reverberated through the chamber. "We have seen their victory at Sirius 7, and we have seen what they are capable of. They are an anomaly, an unpredictable force that must be eradicated before it destabilizes the entire galaxy. We must strike now, before their potential grows into something we cannot control." The chamber was divided. Some senators nodded in agreement with Thrax, their eyes filled with the cold certainty of military logic. They believed that humanity's rise was an aberration, a fluke that had to be crushed before it spread further. But others, like Chancellor Xeller of the Uvran Collective, could not ignore the evidence. The victory at Sirius 7 was not a fluke. It had been a turning point. Humanity was here to stay. Back on Earth, President Lillian Carter stood in front of a holographic projection of the galaxy, her hand clenched into a fist. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of military actions and diplomatic maneuvers. The pressure was mounting. On one hand, humanity was engaged in a brutal war for survival. On the other, they had to carefully navigate the political minefield that was the galactic stage. "We have two paths before us," President Carter said to her inner circle, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "We can continue to fight, to hold our ground, and to prove that we will not bend to the will of others. Or we can take a different approach, one of negotiation, where we stand as equals among the stars." General Marcus Steele, ever the pragmatist, spoke first. "We've proven ourselves in battle. We've won every skirmish, every engagement. But we must understand the galaxy is not just about strength. It's about leverage. And right now, we hold the only card that matters: survival." Carter nodded. "Survival may be our greatest strength, but we also need allies. The Uvran may be the key. If we can sway them, it might tip the balance in our favor." But not everyone was convinced. Some of the more hawkish members of the cabinet were pushing for a more aggressive approach, one that would involve launching attacks on key galactic powers to force their hand. The stakes were growing higher, and the options were fewer. Across the stars, the future was in the balance. As the war raged on, the choice between diplomacy and all-out destruction would define the destiny of humanity. Would they carve a place for themselves through force of arms, or would they become a new power, standing alongside the ancient civilizations of the galaxy as equals? The decision would be made soon, and the entire universe would feel its consequences. The day of reckoning had come. Humanity's place in the galaxy would no longer be decided by others. It would be decided by their own actions. The final battle, the one that would either ensure their survival or lead to their annihilation, was upon them. The decisions made in the coming hours would shape the future of the entire galaxy. At the heart of the conflict was Earth, now fully entrenched in both the war and the political struggle for recognition. President Lillian Carter stood before the assembled leaders of the United Terran Union, her face etched with the weariness of months of conflict. But there was something else in her eyes, something fierce, unyielding. Humanity had already proven its ability to survive. Now they would prove their ability to lead. "We have fought," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "But now we must decide how we will continue to fight. Do we continue to draw our lines in the sand, fighting to hold territory, and prove ourselves with every skirmish? Or do we strike a different path? One of unity, one of diplomacy, one that makes it clear that humanity's future is ours to decide." The room was divided. General Steele leaned forward, his expression hard. "We've proven our mettle on the battlefield, but the universe isn't just going to let us walk away with it. If we sit back now and negotiate from a position of weakness, we're going to lose everything. The Kralok, the Xilari, they won't stop. The AI has already made it clear that they want us gone. Let's not forget," Carter responded firmly, "that we are stronger than anyone thought we could be. This isn't about weakness. This is about showing the galaxy that we can stand with them, not above them, but with them. On the other side of the galaxy, the diplomatic halls of the Galactic Senate were buzzing with activity. The crisis had reached its peak. The factions were split. Some races, such as the Uvran Collective and the Centauri, leaned towards aligning with humanity, understanding that the AI had perhaps made an overreach in its judgment. Others, like the Kralok and the Exilari, viewed humanity's rise as a direct threat to their centuries of dominance. As the debate raged on, the Terran fleet prepared for a final push. The Exilari and Kralok had amassed a force that would overwhelm any traditional defense. It was a do-or-die situation. The Terran fleet had no choice but to strike before the enemy could consolidate their power. If they waited too long, they would be fighting on multiple fronts, and there would be no room for negotiation. Then came a transmission. It was from Chancellor Xelar of the Uvran Collective, sent to President Carter herself. "We are willing to listen." The message began. The Uvran and Centauri agree that the AI's classification of humanity was premature. We propose a ceasefire, a new agreement that allows humanity to join the Galactic Council as an equal, not as a threat. The room fell silent. It was an offer no one had expected. The Uvran's proposal was revolutionary. The very idea that humanity might be granted a seat at the table of galactic powers had been inconceivable mere months ago. But now it was within reach. Carter looked at her inner circle. The decision was hers. "We can either continue down the path of endless war," she said, turning to Steele, "or we can take this opportunity to build a future where humanity stands as a true power in the galaxy. It's not just about survival anymore. It's about the future we want to create, and that future starts today." With a sharp nod, Steele reluctantly agreed. "It's a gamble, but it's the right one." The ceasefire was agreed upon, and peace talks began. Over the course of several weeks, diplomats from every corner of the galaxy came together. Humanity's representatives stood side by side with the Uvran, the Centauri, and even factions that had once been hostile. The negotiations were tense, but there was a sense of inevitability in the air. The universe would never be the same. Humanity had carved its place in the galaxy, not just as survivors, but as equals, ready to shape the future alongside the civilizations that had once seen them as nothing more than an insignificant species. In the end, it wasn't just humanity that had won. The galaxy had been forced to evolve, to reconsider what it meant to be a part of this universe, and the message was clear. Humanity's potential was no longer a threat. It was a promise of a new era, one built on cooperation, ingenuity, and the unshakable will to stand tall in the face of overwhelming odds. And as the peace talks concluded, the galaxy looked to the future, knowing that the greatest force in the universe had not been an army or a fleet. It had been humanity's unwavering determination.